This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. And today's a very special show, very special guest, very special time in the history of the world. This is August 2015, 1971. Was a man named President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. And one of the reasons the economy is the way it is and the uncertainty is the way it is and everything's in a bubble the way it is all stems back to that one date, August 15th, 1971. This is a very important show. And most importantly, what do you think is going to happen? What's going on now? And what can you do in the future? So we have a very special guest today is George Gammon. And then Kim, any compliments you want to have for George?
Yeah, well, I told George at one point, I said, just make sure in the future you still take my calls. Because I know it's going to get more and more well-known. I said, just make sure you keep taking my calls.
So Kim is in South Carolina and George and I in beautiful Scottsdale, Arizona. And again, it's a very important show. So the reason I have George is because he's the guy I called early in the morning to find out, God, how much money did they pump this morning into to keep this balloon floating around? So George, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's always great to be here.
You're a young guy, but what do you recall or what do you remember of the significance of August 15th, 1971?
Well, boy, there's a lot of things I remember. I remember growing up and my father used to collect silver utensils and put them in a safe. And that was kind of the first, back then you didn't think much of it. But now that you realize what happened during the 70s, you understand the significance of that. But really what that did from an economic standpoint is it completely gave the government and the Fed free will to print as much money as they want to print. There was nothing that would prevent them. There was nothing that would constrain them, which was why a gold standard was set up in the first place. It's to give the government some sort of constraint with spending or printing of money, if you will. And now what we've seen in 2020 is the government spent $5 trillion above and beyond what they received in tax revenue. So we call it deficit spending. $5 trillion, and to give you some context, between 1976 and 1996, the total outstanding debt of the United States was about $5 trillion. So about that 200-year time frame, it took us to build up $5 trillion in debt, and in 2020 alone, the government accumulated $5 trillion in debt. So, really
just to give an example, because we can't, trillion sounds like million, sounds like billion. Yeah. So let me give you. This is one of the better ways I can relate to it. If you spent $1 a minute, how long would it take to spend $1 trillion? Answer? 34,000 years. Yeah. And it takes a Fed less than a minute to print $1 trillion.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. That's why
it takes the government less than a minute to spend it.
So can I ask why? Why did Nixon take us off the gold standard?
Well, there was a lot of foreigners that had these green pieces of paper, Kim, and they said, we don't want these green pieces of paper anymore. We want our gold. And what happened is we just didn't have enough gold. We kept wanting to print money, so he didn't have a choice. Takes off the gold standard. And,
so they didn't have the gold to cash in the currency.
Yeah, because what happened, just to make a long story short, is the original base money, the gold, went to the Fed, and they kept creating more and more and more and more currency units. Well, those currency units are a claim on gold. And that's okay unless those people that have those claims actually want the gold, and there's not enough gold there because you've printed too many claims against the gold. So that's basically what happened in 1971, and what gave the government the power to do what they do today in the Fed is just to really create money out of thin air and as much as they want.
Once again, it takes a person spending $1 trillion at $1 a minute, 34,000 years. And they can print it and spend it in a second. That's what happened in 1971. If you can get your brain around that one. And so one quick question, which you can explain better than I could. it was Charles de Gaulle, I think it was, one of those guys who got very upset with the United States. He called it an exorbitant privilege to be the reserve currency. In other words, what happened in 1944, towards the end of World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement was formed, and the U.S. promised, if you allow the dollar to be the currency of the world, we promise we'll back it by gold. That was 1944. And in 1971, Nixon said, we broke our promise. So
that's right.
what is an exorbitant privilege?
Well, it's when you can create almost unlimited amounts of dollars of the fiat currency, and you don't experience significant price inflation because those dollars are being absorbed by the rest of the world that needs the dollars to buy things like oil, as an example. So if we didn't have the world reserve currency, we couldn't print as much money as we have.
Right. And the way I understood it is that we could buy anything we wanted with fake money. So we go to France, we say, we like your wines, and we'd buy your wines. We go to Germany, so we like your Mercedes, so we buy their Mercedes. And go to Japan, we like your Sonys, and we buy your Sonys.
Or just anything in Target. I mean, go to Target, go to Walmart. 99% of the stuff is made outside of the United States. So if it wasn't for foreigners making all this stuff and us giving them just green pieces of paper, which we couldn't do unless we had the world reserve currency, next time you go shopping, there wouldn't be anything in the shelves.
That's coming. If you ever been to a socialist country, the shelves are bare because their currency is not worth anything.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is I was listening to a podcast from our mutual friend Simon Black the other day.
Well, he's a smart boy. Huh?
Yeah, he is. He's talking to a gal that grew up in communist Russia, and she was saying that we as Americans think that was a very poor country, and the thing is. Maybe I just made this mistake. I associate poor with not having enough money. But she said, no, it's not that they didn't have money. They had money. There was just no stuff to buy. So you still had to wait in line 6 hours to get a loaf of bread, even though you had the money to buy the bread. So it reminds you of how important the stuff, the goods and services, is really the wealth. It's not really the green pieces of paper.
Right. And one of the stories I remember was, I think, Brezhnev, one of those guys from Russia, came to America, and he went to like a Target, and he says, holy mackerel. Right. Holy mackerel. He couldn't believe it.
All the stuff you could buy, all the variety, all the colors, everything just kind of blew him away.
But that's an exorbitant privilege.
Yeah, it is an exorbitant privilege, but unfortunately, it also gives the government the ability to spend. And when the government spends, it distorts the economy because it misallocates those precious resources. And we saw that in communist Russia, and we see that happening more and more today in the United States.
But it also gives us the power to fight wars.
Yeah, that's right.
We can just print all this money and buy tanks, weapons, rockets, things that go boom in the night, bust in the night. Yeah. That is the problem with the dollar. So that's why I told the story of 1972. I was flying in Vietnam looking for dollars. I'm looking for gold. And I flew behind enemy lines. It was enemy lines because the NVA was rolling south. It used to be in our hands a few months earlier, but now it was in Viet Cong hands. And I walk up to this window, this little Vietnamese woman, and she gave me the best education of my life, because I think gold was about 35. It was floating to about 40, 45 an ounce. This is in 72. Just 6 months after going off the gold standard, the price of gold was already going up because the dollar was coming down. So I tried to negotiate with her that I wanted a discount on her gold. She didn't even speak English. She just smiles at me. She goes, spot. I said, what the hell? I've got a spot on my shirt or something. And that was one of the best educations I got, because basically what you're saying, you stupid idiot.
Yeah.
Spot is the price of gold all over the world, because gold is real money. Mm-hmm. So is that how you interpret her saying to me?
Well, that among many other things.
There was another point I wanted to just ask about, because George, you said 99% of products in Target aren't made in the U.S. Isn't that a major issue going forward? Is that we don't produce anything?
Yeah, it is.
Including our medicines.
Yeah, if you think about what the U.S. economy has become, it's an economy of what I would call domestic services. And most people just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, oh, that's cool. But basically what we do is Uber, we do restaurants, we do Top Golf, we do lawyers, accountants, things like that. Again, domestic services. But at the end of the day, you need goods to consume. And we are held hostage, basically, by the people who produce those goods, which are the individuals that are outside of the United States. And so if, a lot of people say, well, we need to start producing stuff right here in the United States, we need to do that again. And that may be true, but what they don't understand is that would also result in significant consumer price inflation, because that toy that you buy at Target for your kid that's $5, if that was produced in the United States, it would be $25. So it's not just as easy as snapping your fingers and getting all those goods just produced here in the United States. Then there's supply chain issues. There's a lot to it, but it puts us in a very compromising position, because when those dollars go out of the United States, those green pieces of paper to buy all the stuff that the foreigners are producing, often what happens is those dollars come back into the United States buying United States assets. You see, so if you think about someone in, let's say, Japan producing XYZ for the United States, they get $1 million to do that. Well, they just don't sit on that $1 million. Often they'll take the $1 million and come and buy our treasuries, you see, or our real estate. So we're just basically leveraging all of our assets, or selling all of our assets to consume in the short term.
So George, I called you the other day. I said, because this deficit, this is. Did you say, my numbers could be wrong, is that they're now pushing $120 billion a month?
Yeah, the Fed is buying $120 billion a month worth of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities.
This is in 2021 on the 50th anniversary. Are they celebrating, or they have to?
Yeah, I don't think that number alone is reason not to celebrate. That's basically quantitative easing that we started after the GFC. They haven't been able to stop. And if our economy was that healthy, they wouldn't need to do $120 billion a month in quantitative easing.
GFC is a great financial reset?
Yeah, the global financial crisis back in 2008.
It's never been fixed.
Right, correct.
So I was listening to your friend Jeff Snyder. Man, I tell you, he is one smart dude, but he has a lot to say about this whole thing that's going on now. Yeah. Could you tell people who Jeff Snyder is and why you and I listen to him, if we can hang on to what he's saying? Oh, is he hard to understand? I mean, he's so out there, smart, but it's hard to understand what he's saying.
Well, if you understand the language, it's pretty easy. But Jeff is a genius. There's no other way around it. And he's with Alhambra Partners. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And but he is probably the foremost expert in the world on something called the repo market. But to keep things simple, he's probably the foremost expert on the world on the global monetary system, which creates dollars and destroys dollars. So all those dollars that we're talking about, those going around the world, Jeff is the best. He understands it better than anyone else on the planet.
And so if I could give your show a plug here, it's called, George has a Rebel Capitalist, and Jeff Snyder is a regular guest on this program. I don't invite Jeff on because I wouldn't understand what he's saying. I mean, we were at George Gammon's event in Miami with Sarah, and they locked me alone with Jeff for half an hour, and I came out, my brain was fried. But anyway, please go visit, George Gammon's Rebel Capitalist show, because he has some fabulous guests. He has more time to go into. He uses his whiteboard and does presentations. But this is no ordinary subject, especially on the 50th anniversary of August 15th, 1971, the day the world changed. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anytime, anywhere on iTunes, Android, and YouTube. And please leave a review when you listen. And all of our programs are archived at Rich Dad Radio. We archive them for one main reason. We don't sell anything. All we sell is the opportunity to listen to what we have to say. So you go to richdadradio.com, listen to this podcast again. You'll pick up twice as much, because repetition is one of the best ways to learn. But most importantly, if you have friends, family, and business associates, and that idiot brother-in-law of yours, have them listen to this show, because we're talking about his money that he's probably saving under a blanket right now, just as the 50th anniversary comes rolling through. And this is going to be the biggest financial crash in history, because never has the bubble been this big, ever. Because they didn't fix it in 2008, they didn't fix it in 2000, they've never fixed it since 1971. So, George, what do you think is going to happen in the future here? What's, now we can print as much as we like, and we're printing.
Yeah, well, I think that's the $100 trillion question. And I think what it results in is fewer goods and services, which makes society as a whole poorer, right? So if we think about when government spends money, it distorts the economy. And then if you kind of say, okay, well, I get that. The economy is not as efficient with the more the government spends and the less the private sector spends. So, one thing we were talking about the other day that I think is a good visual for most people is prior to setting up the Fed in 1913, the government spending as a percentage of total economic output, GDP, right, was about 5%. And now it's almost 60%. So you think about how much more efficient the private sector is, or think about how inefficient the government is, like DMV. Well, now we got DMV producing 60% of GDP, right? That's really the bottom line. So then you think about, and I use this, Schiff gives this example, and it's fantastic, that if you're out on a deserted island and you've got, let's say, $1 billion, you're still poor because there's no stuff, right? So if the government spends more and more, or they represent a larger percentage of GDP, that means we have less and less and less stuff, which takes us closer and closer and closer to Venezuela or to Weimar Germany. And I'm not talking about from a standpoint of inflation. I'm talking about from a standpoint of not having access to goods and services, or having access to fewer goods and services. Another thing you and I think we're talking about the other day is, and I think a lot of people could relate to this, their investment portfolio is probably larger today than it was in 2019. But I would argue that even if your investment portfolio is larger, you're poorer because you have access to less stuff. You and I are we enjoy going, well, I shouldn't say the name, but there's a restaurant here that you and I enjoy going to. And I try to get a reservation there a couple days in advance. You can't do it, right? I heard a story, Kyle Bass went to an investment conference, and he just tried to get breakfast at the hotel. The line was 2 hours long. Then he went to Denny's, couldn't get into Denny's, went to IHOP, couldn't get into IHOP because they don't have workers. They have reduced hours. They have reduced capacity. So we have access to fewer goods and services, although our bank account might have a higher number. But so therefore, by definition, even though we might have more paper wealth, we're actually poorer and our standard of living is going down. So that's what people really need to get their mind around when they see the government spending $5 trillion above and beyond what they receive in taxes, and that translating into economic distortions, which translates into us becoming poorer.
So I'm going to ask you a loaded question.
Go ahead.
A loaded question. Why are they paying people not to work?
Yeah.
And what's going to happen when they stop paying, whatever they do in September? I mean, is this the most, this is the 50th anniversary. I knew it was going to get bad, but not this stupid. It is stupid right now. We're paying people not to work.
Yeah, they're buying votes. It's that simple. They're just buying votes. It's that easy. They're buying votes. And so the problem there is once you get people adjusted to getting, quote unquote, free money, because it's not free, it comes with a very heavy penalty. But once people get acclimated to that, it's very hard to say, okay, no more stimmy checks, no more additional, rent, eviction moratorium, no more, mortgage forbearance, no more child tax credit, all that stuff. You can't take that away.
So that means if a restaurant is open now and they now have to pay something from $7 to $15 an hour, it's kind of hard to say in September you're back to $7.
That's right. Yeah, they can't get people to work, and it's again, it goes back to what we're saying. How do you measure wealth? Goods and services. If we can't get people to work, we can't get them to produce. If we can't get them to produce, then the only thing we have left is printing money, and we know how that ends.
So your point of view is just to get the votes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any question, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening all over the place right now. You talk about supplies. The supply chains are all clogged up. Things are back ordered. For us, example, it usually took us, I think it was like we had to put in an order for books like 8 or 9 weeks out. Now we're talking, we're in August and we can't get books until May.
Yeah, that's a great example.
It's so backed up. So we're already experiencing so much limited supply all over.
Yeah, and for the viewers or the listeners, I'm sure they can relate to this. Just go down to your local strip mall and go to each store and see how many help wanted signs.
But is there any hope of reversing this? Is it an inevitable coming down the pike? What's your thought, George?
Well, yes, you can absolutely reverse it, but it doesn't come without pain. It's just like being addicted to a drug like heroin. The economy is addicted to monetary heroin. So you say, can the heroin addict improve? Absolutely, they can. They can get healthy, but they've got to get off the drug. And if you get off the drug, you're going to go through extreme withdrawals. There's no way to get off the drug in an easy way. There's no way to get off the drug and go back to healthy without experiencing significant pain.
So what specifically could a person do to get off the drug? I mean, stop spending, stop working, or?
Yeah, we just reduce the size of government, for heaven's sakes. Yeah, we just reduce the size of government. We cut back the government spending, so we're not doing all this deficit spending.
But that'll never happen. That'll never happen.
Yeah, but you're asking me how to do it. That's how you do it. But then the economy, we would go through a massive deflationary deleveraging.
Well, what can a Rich Dad Radio listener do?
Oh, what can they do to really protect themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. Number one, you've got to own precious metals. And I'm not saying 100% of your portfolio, but in this type of environment, you have to own gold, at least I like to say 10%. And then if you, on the speculative side of the spectrum, you might want to own some Bitcoin because there's not much, it's not exactly cyclical. If the economy goes down, the Bitcoin might go up. But I think even easier than that for the average person is if you have a mortgage, make sure that it's a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Don't have an adjustable rate. Because I think that's the easiest thing that people can do. And, going back to Kyle Bass, he's an extremely sophisticated investor, but he was on Grant Williams' podcast. Grant asked him the same question. He said, well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm just buying productive hard assets with fixed rate debt. So that would mean an apartment complex.
Farmland.
Farmland, that would mean a rental property. Now, I'm not saying go out there and buy immediately because, unfortunately, prices are very high. You got to be very, very careful. But if you can get some positive cash flow, purchase positive cash flow with fixed rate debt, then if we do get significant price inflation over the next 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to benefit from that.
So Kim and I have been discussing this as a strategy. We have a lot of property with a lot of equity in it. And we're talking about refinancing anyway because interest rates have come down.
Yep.
So the idea is we borrow an extra $500,000 and fix it at 30 years and then invest it. What do you think of that?
I think it's great. As long as what you invest in is paying you enough to cover the mortgage payment. See, what I would not suggest people do is refinance their house, take out their equity, and then buy gold, as an example, because you should have your gold with something else, right?
Okay.
But don't leverage your house to buy gold because the gold isn't going to pay you enough, or it's not going to pay you to own it. If you buy something with the equity, make sure it's paying you so you're not having to come out of pocket for that additional mortgage payment.
And that's kind of our formula anyway, Kim. We borrow on fixed and then we invest in
cash flow.
Income
cash
producing.
flow goes back to cash flow.
Right. Yeah.
No, no, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense because we were talking to Peter Schiff about this, and of course he likes emerging markets where these companies are paying dividends in the 8, 9, 10% range, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so do I. I mean, I talked to some incredibly smart people like Lynn Alden, as an example, someone that I'd put right up there with Jeff Snyder. And she has a very similar strategy where, she has some dollar-denominated investments, but a lot of foreign companies that pay fantastic dividends that are cheap and just good, solid companies that are throwing off cash.
So any other, on the 50th anniversary, the biggest insane thing? I'm almost laughing about this because our neighbor, Kim's our neighbor, is, Scott Shermer and I, and we always talk about at the height of a bubble, people are happiest.
Yeah, that's right.
They're happy.
What's euphoria?
Euphoria, yeah, because it feels good, and that's what they've done. The net result of all this money printing and money inputting, people are ecstatic. You can't get restaurant reservations and all that. So our neighbor Scott Shermer and I went to this restaurant not too far from our office, and women were in evening gowns, and he looked at me, and I looked at him and said, "It's time to sell."
They weren't
That
going,
was our
they were
indicator.
not going to a prom,
Yeah.
right? And
What's that?
they were not going to a prom, right?
No, that was what Daniela Gambone asked me on Stansbury, because I called the evening gown indicator.
Yeah.
And she just cracked up. She says, "Well, you mean their high school prom?" I said, "No, I think they're about 3 decades out of their high school. They're just high as kites, drinking all that champagne, celebrating." I mean, some of those gowns were like you could trade them in. You could buy a house with them. But boy, the point is, as we say, the euphoria is highest.
Yeah, right.
Just before the bust.
Yeah, that's right.
Anything you want to say about that? Because that's what you study.
Well, I completely agree. And you've got to look at sentiment, I think, is what you're doing in psychology. And as far as the bursting of the bubble, all these stock market bubble, housing bubble, everything bubble, you know that it is inevitable, but you don't know that it's imminent. Those are two different things. So it's all a timing issue. But what you can do is you can know if we're a lot closer to the top than we are at the bottom. So you've got to ask yourself, you look at GameStop, or you look at all these meme stocks out there. You look at what's happening in the market. These things don't happen when we're at the absolute bottom. If people can think back to 2009 when we were at a bottom, or 2012 when we were in the bottom of the housing market, you didn't see euphoria. You saw the opposite. You saw panic. So we don't see any panic today, and we see the hysteria, we see the euphoria.
You see, I said evening gowns.
Evening gowns, that's right. And therefore, it tells us that the crash might not be tomorrow, but we're a lot closer to it than we were in 2009. I can tell you that.
And there's another very, very important point. I was listening to it's a Sokoloff, one of the top hedge fund guys. He says the reason people lose when they lose is they start chasing. In other words, they're at the top, it comes down to the bottom, and they don't want to admit they lost. So right after the bottom, they start chasing it. And they double down. They say, I can't go home and tell the wife and kids I lost everything.
Or they buy the dip.
Yeah,
you hear that all the time. Buy the dip.
They start chasing it. The reason I say that's important is the last depression, which started in 1929. It was 25 years. No, 1929 to 1954 before the Dow got back to its high. So it was at 381 in 1929, and it took till 1954 to hit 380. Out one again.
Yeah, and that might not even be adjusted for inflation. When you adjust for inflation, what I've seen is you look at the stock market in like 1925, 1981, and it's flat. And another thing most people don't realize, talking about inflation, they think stocks are a good hedge, but what they don't realize in 1970, you probably remember this well, from 72 to 74, the stock market went down by 50%. 50%. And this is when we had a significant consumer price inflation. So stocks aren't necessarily a great inflation hedge. That's why but what is a great inflation hedge is gold and a fixed rate mortgage, going back to what we were talking about.
Yeah,
so the reason what Georgia says is so important is I'm old enough to remember in the 1950s, my rich dad said to me, he says, only gamblers are in the stock market.
Yeah.
And he says, if you're a smart investor, you're in the bond market or a saver, basically. So Rich Dad never had any stocks. He had bonds. And then what happened in 1971, Nixon takes $1 off the gold standard. 74, ERISA comes out, Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which today is known as a 401k or the IRA. So what happened in 74, for the way I was tracking it, because I was alive at the time looking at it going, oh my God, they're forcing all my generation into the stock market.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so George, the evening gowns in Old Town Scottsdale were the top of a stock market, and the old guys have to retire. How's that sound to you?
Yeah. Well,
Sell the evening gown.
Yeah. Well, you hit on an important message there, and that's that because of the Fed and a lot of things, we could go on for the next 2 hours about, they've pushed the average Joe into the stock market.
That's what
that's really
exactly
the only
what
way
Rich
to.
Dad was saying. He
Yeah,
says
that's the only way to get
screwing
ahead. That's right. That's right. And they have been doing that through inflation for a long, long time. Even if it's 2 or 3% compounded, it turns this society into speculators.
Correct.
The problem with that is then you always have to have the stock market go up, and it doesn't necessarily always go up. We look at Japan in 1990. Their stock market went down for, call it, 20 years. And I don't think it's still down below
They're still
the peak.
printing money.
Yeah, it's still down below its peak. So if that were to happen in the United States,
It's aloha.
yeah, well, that's a good way to put it. I was going to say.
But the other thing, the
it's
good thing about being an
aloha.
old guy was 71 was Nixon, 74 was ERISA, the 401k, 74 was when Ford said you can buy gold. And so I was watching all this, tracking along, and you can ask Kim, we don't own stocks, do we?
No.
And the reason is exactly as you defined it, the economy is what you can produce, goods and services.
Mm-hmm.
So Kim and I produce either, we produce our board game, we produce our books and all this. Yeah. So that's our economy. We actually produce goods. And you recently, Kim, you just brought the board game back to the States, didn't you?
Yes, we're producing it in the U.S. now.
So, we're tracking exactly the mindset you're tracking on. So if everybody could listen right now, is not be a speculator, but be a producer. Produce something somebody needs and wants to give you money for.
Yeah. It just goes back to the basics.
Yeah.
Just produce more than you consume.
So we'll come back. We're going to take a break, and then we'll wrap it up. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. Good news and bad news about money. We're very fortunate to have a good friend, George Gammon, here. He also lives here in Arizona for temporarily, because other times he's joining Peter Schiff and the other characters in Puerto Rico. And if you understood tax law and you understood real estate, you wouldn't be in Puerto Rico. But anyway, it's kind of funny. I give him more grief for being in Puerto Rico. Same as Maloney and those guys and Mark Moss. They're all good guys, but they don't understand real estate. So we're going to wrap it up right now. Kim, any comments, any final words?
I do. I think back when George, when you were talking about the economic demise, when it does come crashing down, I think of Chris Martenson. He wrote the book Crash Course, and he talked about, and this is my question, he talked about when it happens, it's like there's a stadium, an arena, and you're just dropping water little by little by little by little, and then you don't see it all coming up.
Right.
But it's in that last minute where the whole thing implodes. It's those last few drops that crash that overflow the entire stadium. My concern is that's what's happening. People aren't seeing it, but all of a sudden even though it's been building, when it happens, is there some one trigger that's going to set it off, or is it just going to be this slow, and all of a sudden people are going to go, oh my God, what happened?
Well, it's a complex question because not only can we have
yes.
When people say there's a crash or think about a crash, we always think about prices going down. We're talking about asset prices, but they can also crash up, right? So we think about the Venezuelan stock market that crashed, but in nominal terms, it went straight up. It went straight to the moon. It's just the.
What does nominal mean? What does nominal mean?
When you don't adjust for inflation, so just the Venezuelan stock market was the best performing stock market. It was up by like 10,000%, every single year, maybe every single month. But the problem was those stocks are denominated in worthless bolivars. You can't buy anything with it. So the stock market, or the housing market for that matter, it can crash up, but it's all about purchasing power, right? That's what you got to ask yourself.
And that's what's happening right now, because I was talking to this realtor. She says, Kevin, low-price houses now in Scottsdale are $400,000.
Wow.
Holy mackerel.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah.
Holy mackerel. I can't believe it. So that's a crash up.
Yeah, it could be a crash up. That's right. Again, your purchasing power goes down, and that's what. But as far as a specific catalyst, right now, what I would be looking at is the amount of government spending, because unfortunately, our economy is now addicted to it. And if they get gridlock, or if they don't spend enough, I mean, we talk about these trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, it's just astronomical. But if they don't continue to spend more and more and more, the probability is very high that we do see that crash. So if you started to see gridlock in Washington, where they couldn't get out the next round of stimulus, as an example, you should take note of that and understand that the probabilities are getting higher that we do see a crash in the market, because it's that drug, that monetary drug. Once they stop the drug, then the addict is going to have problems.
Well, the two things I saw, Robinhood failed, the IPO. Not failed, but didn't do as well. But also the Republicans joined the Democrats on the infrastructure bill. So what does that mean to you?
It means that...
more money.
Yeah, it just means that both parties have gone so far to the left that they're unrecognizable right now, and I think they're headed further to the left, and so that would say, okay, well, it's less likely that we get that gridlock that would stop them from spending money. The question is, will they spend enough?
Well, that's what Jeff Snyder was saying. It doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, because
he
doesn't.
It's all show.
Yeah, because he doesn't think they can spend enough to compensate for the lack of dollars that are being created by the banks right now.
So I called. I'm not kidding. I called you about 6 o'clock in the morning before you're hiking Camelback, and I said, "What does 120 billion mean? They're printing every month. What does that mean?" Well,
it just means that the Federal Reserve is creating these bank reserves out of thin air. Just funny money.
Pumping it in.
Well, they're giving it to the banks in return for treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. So it's just, they're saying, okay, bank, you've got those treasuries. We'll give you these bank reserves that we just create out of thin air, and we'll see what happens. And I think Jeff would argue that it's more about psychology. And I think that's...
I listened to Jeff on that. I got more confused. My brain went...
Yeah, but
my brain went soft.
But basically what he's saying is the same thing that you were saying back in 1974. And that it's all about psychology, trying to push people into the stock market to make the stock market go higher. That's kind of one of the premises of what he talks about.
So I'd like to close. Go ahead, Kim.
Why would the banks agree to do that?
The banks...
To sell their securities and their mortgage-backed securities and...
Oh, well, they don't have a choice. Yeah, so if they're buying from what we call a primary dealer, it's basically they don't have a choice.
George, would you show us I love your metaphor about the hot air balloon and the gondola. I mean, that changed my whole view.
Yeah. I think that going back to the financialization of the economy and how they're pushing everyone into the stock market. What's interesting, and sometimes we forget this, but the stock market should be a reflection of the real economy. And I use that analogy of a hot air balloon. We've always seen them on a Sunday morning or something, early in the morning, they're floating across a blue sky. And the way it should work is the real economy should be the hot air balloon, and the stock market should be that little basket. Right. So wherever the real economy goes, if it's doing better, if it, that's where the stock market should go. But unfortunately now, because of all what we've been talking about, the government spending, the Fed, 50 years of us being off of the gold standard and financializing the economy, now all of a sudden the financial economy and the stock market is the hot air balloon. And the real economy is that basket. So wherever the stock market goes, the real economy goes. And that's the big problem we have right now.
The last depression was 25 years. The most important thing is, this is why I always go nuts, is what should the government do? The government's going to do what they're going to do. They're not changing. The question is, what are you going to do? So that's why I thank you all for listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show. Thank you, George, for coming by.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we'll all see you very much. Thank you very much. Bye, Kim.